Hello and welcome to GameSec. We are talking about the Sharp X68000.
Yeah, this is a cool PC in Japan, and when you're done doing all your word processing, you can play some awesome video games.
You can, and it was mostly meant for video games actually, instead of, it could do other stuff, but mostly video games.
That's awesome. So, well, why don't you just tell us all about it, Joe, since let's
check it out. The Sharp X68000 was released only in Japan in March of 1987 for 369,000 yen. That was around 3,000 US dollars. The system gets its super creative name from its Motorola 68000 CPU, which originally ran at 10 megahertz. This mighty computer tower runs games off of 5.25-inch floppy disks. Many near-perfect arcade ports were released, as well as an almost unfathomable amount of shoot-'em-ups. Since it's a computer, there is a keyboard and yes, even a mouse. On the front was a standard joystick port, but Player 2's port was conveniently located in the back of the unit. The controllers only allowed the use of 2 buttons, but many games came with their own special controllers. There is even a Capcom adapter that lets you use Genesis 6-button controllers. The system has over 65,000 colors and can be expanded to up to 12 megabytes of RAM. You could also add an expansion card to enable external MIDI devices for improved music on certain games. And don't forget the external sound mixing board you're going to need to hook all of this together. And these days you might need a video scaler like the Micomsoft XPC4 to work with a standard VGA monitor or a TV set. Later on, Sharp released upgraded models like the X68000. This is the compact version here. It used super high-tech 3.5-inch floppies for maximum power. So what if you had a bunch of older games that you wanted to play and they just won't fit into this smaller new unit? Simple! Just fold the floppies twice like so and they fit right in, ready to play. Good job! Be smart, like me. The games often came in giant boxes and some of them were pretty elaborate. You are going to need a lot of shelf space for these. The Sharp X68000 was manufactured all the way through 1993. They're even rare in Japan these days, but you might be able to get a good starter unit from anywhere between $200 to $600.
All right, man, I'm really hyped. This X68000 is pretty freaking cool. You did a good job talking it up, so...
Well, thank you for that compliment.
You're very welcome.
Anyway, we wanted to do this like way back in July or August, but the power supply on the system just kept failing, and apparently it's kind of a common problem, and we went through a few power supplies, finally got one really good one that works.
Yeah, I was really bummed. I really wanted to do the system episode, and every time the damn thing started to fail, I was really sad about it, but we got it. We got it. It works. Now we got some awesome games to talk about.
Yeah, let's talk about the games. Star Wars Attack on the Death Star is a wireframe game where you pilot an X-Wing. Now, I love this Star Wars arcade game by Atari, so I had high hopes for this one since it looked pretty similar. Boy, was I let down. You start the game flying around open space trying to take out a whole bunch of TIE fighters. I really don't like it when Star Wars games start out like this. It's just so damn boring. Your little radar thingy doesn't really indicate if the TIE fighter is above or below you. It's almost useless. Anyway, after you shoot down 256,768 TIE fighters, you proceed to Stage 2. Here you're on the surface of the Death Star and you're shooting down buildings. Well, at least I think they're buildings. This part is actually kind of fun and it reminds me a bit of the Atari Star Wars arcade game. Basically, you just need to get this number here down to 0. After that, you go into the actual trench. Alright, now this is gonna be awesome. Or not? This part is super hard. Good luck avoiding anything here. Even on easy, this game is extremely unforgiving. Now, I admire what they tried to do, but I wish they had just ported the Atari game instead. That one was a lot better.
Gradius was released alongside the X68000. This game is where the upgrade bar was introduced. As you shoot certain enemies, they'll leave behind a jewel-looking icon. Blue icons will clear the screen, but orange icons will highlight your upgrade bar by 1. Once you get to the power-up you want, you select it. But once you get hit, you lose everything, and I mean even your speed. You are super slow and you gotta start collecting everything all over again. This is where the hate for this style of system lies, because it makes going forward almost impossible at times. Other than this, Gradius is great fun with some of the best music out there. Salamander was released a year later in 1988. Konami tried a different weapon power-up system this time around, and I almost like it more than the first one. Once you destroy certain enemies, they'll drop different types of power-ups. This works well, but maybe Konami felt this was too much like other games, so as far as I know, this is the last game that used this style. Salamander also differs from Gradius as it's not strictly a side-scrolling shooter. You also have vertical scrolling levels as well. I like this, and it's one of my favorite entries in the series. Once again, the music is great, and the levels all have more of a fleshy, bloody, messy feel to them.
Pick it up, Ford. Speed up. Speed up.
Gradius 2 was released in 1992. Oddly enough, if you configure the system to the USA setting, the title screen changes to Vulcan Venture, but everything else in the game is untouched. Does this mean that Spock is piloting the ship? It's still the same style of upgrade bar, but this time around you get to choose from 4 different upgrade styles and 2 types of shield. This is a great shooter, but the difficulty is way up there. I'm not good at shooters, and I'm not afraid to admit this, but damn, this has got to be one of the hardest shooters I've ever played. It's too bad too, because I really like the graphics in this game. Maybe it's the 2 to the announcer that keeps telling me that I need practice that really pisses me off.
You need some practice.
God, I wish I could turn that jerk off. Oh well, at least the music is awesome. If you can choose MIDI, it really enhances the already great music. Nemesis 90 Kai is a remake of Nemesis 2 on the MSX with a complete graphical and sound overhaul. And you guessed it, it plays just like the previous games with the upgrade bar, so you know exactly what to expect here. Another great entry into the series from Konami. I'm a bit upset it never made it here to the USA, but at least I was able to enjoy it on the X68000 while I had the chance.
I love me some Super Hang-On, and the X68000 version is pretty damn good. For the most part, it replicates the arcade experience pretty well, except for the choppy background scrolling and some questionable sprite scaling effects, but overall the gameplay is pretty smooth. Since the X68000 only has 2 buttons, the control is kind of weird. Button A is your gas, and button B is the turbo. If you press button B without pressing button A at the same time, it engages the brake. Even selecting your track and your music is weird because the programmers just didn't think to use the D-pad or the joystick to do it. Instead, you press the B button to select and the A button to confirm. Even inputting your name is a challenge. You scroll with button B and let go when you get to the letter you want, but watch out, there's momentum. So when you let go of button B, it'll still scroll for a couple of more letters. And you can only scroll one way. Did I mention there's a time limit to put your name in? Obviously, this was the first time these programmers had ever programmed any kind of menu in a game and couldn't quite figure out how to do it. But the music is great and it uses external MIDI, though the difference in sound quality is not a big one. Still, this is a fun game to play, even though it can be pretty tough.
Akumaju Dracula is a great Castlevania game. It's really no surprise that I would like this game, being the Castlevania nut that I am. So this game is supposed to be a remake of the first Castlevania game on the NES. I can see it in some stages, like the first stage, which feels like a duplicate all the way down to the boss fight. Of course, there are graphical differences, but that's to be expected in a remake. Then there are other stages like this one here, which have been added to beef up the game, I guess. When you first boot up the game, you get to choose from 3 sound modules for the game's soundtrack. The music composition is all the same, but each module sounds different. Here's the X68000's internal FM synth. And here's MIDI with the Roland CM64 module. And finally, here's MIDI with the Roland SC55 module. They all sound good, but I think the CM64 is the most appealing to me. I love this whole idea of a game having multiple soundtracks to choose from, and it would be worth it to buy the extra modules so I could have this choice. Other than that, a few cool abilities were added to this game, like the ability to turn in air while jumping. Also, you can whip downwards, which is really cool, but I don't use it very often. This is a really good entry to the series, and since the X68000 version is hard to find, expensive, and not really practical, you can always get a good port of it on the PS1 with the Castlevania Chronicles release.
I'm one of the few big fans of Thunder Force 2 on the Genesis, so of course I was really eager to play this one. It's actually surprisingly close to the Genesis version, but at the same time surprisingly different. There's a few different weapons here and there, and there's also a different stage which I couldn't get to while recording this. The graphics here are definitely better with 3 layers of scrolling instead of just 2. The music sounds almost identical for the most part, but some of the songs are reused from stage to stage it seems. There are more voices here, but they aren't really any more intelligible than the Genesis version. This game is definitely harder though. Your ship is smaller in the overhead stages and much bigger in the side view stages than they are in the Genesis. They also move much faster. This does not help the difficulty at all. I think the game knows just how frustrating it can be though, because when you lose your last life, yep, you don't even have to get mad. The game swears for you. I really wish they had left that in the Genesis version. Overall, this is a great game, but I think the design of the Genesis version is better and it plays better as a result. So here you get better graphics and maybe slightly better music, but worse gameplay. Which one would you rather play?
Here's a fun game called Étoile Princesse by Exact. I know I'm jacking that name up, but I'm not French, so excuse me. This X68000 exclusive game is an overhead run and gun that plays similar to games like Twinkle Tail on the Mega Drive. The game is fairly easy to control. You can move your character in 8 directions, but you can only fire in 4. I don't understand this, as it would make the game a bit more enjoyable if I could shoot diagonally. Another strange thing is your life bar. I guess it's so long that it all couldn't have fit on screen, so they decided to coil it up like a snake or something. Oh well, as long as it's all there, I really don't care what they do with it. After you defeat a boss, you rescue another anime girl, and usually you're able to play as this character in any stage after that. You switch characters in the menu, but you can only take 3 with you at a time. As you probably already have guessed, each character has their own attacks and magic. Speaking of magic, this is done by holding down the attack button until the gauge on the bottom right fills and then releasing it. You have the ability to jump, so always be on the lookout to jump up to places to find more power-ups. As you can see, the character sprite is fairly large. I kinda have a problem with this as it feels like the screen is zoomed in. I feel like I'm not able to see very far in front of my character. It's not a big deal, but it's noticeable. Still, this is a fun game with large colorful levels, some great boss fights, and music that adds to the overall enjoyment. I'm really glad I got to experience this game.
Aqualese, or at least I think that's what it says, is a damned awesome mech game. Basically, you're running around the stage and attacking with your grappling hook. You have other weapons as well, and you can switch between them in the menu. You do this by pressing both buttons and down at the same time. Why didn't they just give the X68000 controller 3 buttons? Oh well. You jump from platform to platform, and if you press jump in midair, you can grapple onto the ledge above you. This will help you to reach new heights and access more power-ups. Traversing the stages is a blast. This game is really fun to play. It almost reminds me of Target Earth or Cybernator, but this game is exclusive to the X68000. I like it a lot. The graphics get the job done, and the music isn't too shabby either. All in all, I think this game could have been done on the Genesis, but that's certainly not a knock against it. It's just too bad that very few people will get to play this game, as it's rather obscure. This is definitely one of the best games on the system, but unfortunately it resets after you beat the Stage 1 boss, which is pretty lame. I'm running this game off of an internal compact flash drive, and I guess you need to use the real floppies for this one, or I suppose you can just emulate it.
When I first read the title of Mad Stalker, I gotta tell you that a side-scrolling beat-em-up game with a mech is the last thing that would have came into my mind. But here it is, and you know what? It's pretty damn fun. Each stage is made up of you going through a level, taking out minor enemies, and then like all good games of this nature, you fight a boss. I like this game because it's not just your ordinary beat 'em up. There's many different moves you can pull off by doing Street Fighter style actions. Want to shoot your gun? Okay, just do a fireball motion and there you go. The levels are all fairly long and usually have 2 or 3 scenes before the boss fight. I really like the graphics here and the level of detail in each stage. It's really fun watching people in the background running for their lives. Run, sucker! You're gonna die! I like all the neon lights in the background flashing, and I like watching cars getting destroyed by a byproduct of your kicking ass. Oh, and the music is great too. It's very catchy and is a great addition to the game. I guess this game was released on the PC Engine, but I haven't played it, so I don't know if it's the same or not. It would probably be much easier to get a hold of that version. This game is really nice and a much needed addition to the X68000's library.
Perhaps the greatest game on the X68000 is The Cockpit. This fantastic bundle of entertainment from Compaq is the best real-time flight simulator of night landing that you will ever play, bar none. This game embodies everything that the X68000 is about. Pick one of several exciting planes to land at one of several Japanese airports and then the non-stop excitement begins. Holy crap, this is amazing! Don't worry about crashing because the game won't let you. Even if you vary slightly off course or do anything barely wrong, the game will end. That's because losers don't play The Cockpit. With amazing music and graphics that are only rivaled by the incredible F-16 Fighting Falcon for the Sega Master System, The Cockpit rises above the rest in fun and entertainment. To not like The Cockpit is to not like the X68000, and that is a fact.
Hey, what is this? Jumping Flash on the PS1? Nope, it's Geograph Seal on the X68000. If you paid any attention to previous GameSack episodes, then you know I'm a big fan of Jumping Flash, so it's a nice surprise to play this game. Geograph Seal plays very well for having to use a controller with only 2 buttons. You do have to use different button combinations to do different things in this game. Like if you want to look up or down or aim your weapon up and down, you have to hold in both buttons on the controller first and then you're free to move the camera. It doesn't take long to get used to and it works fine. The levels in this game are laid out fairly well. You do have a map on screen, but it's almost useless as nothing ever shows up on it. That's fine as the screen constantly beeps at you, letting you know which direction you need to go to find an enemy or a target. So the object here is to destroy 3 or 4 targets and then make your way to the boss fight. As you destroy each target, you collect a weapon power-up. There are 4 different types of weapons in this game, and they all have their uses in different situations. Each weapon has a bar that depletes as you fire them, but replenishes quickly when you don't. You really have to keep an eye on this, or your weapon will change on you when you aren't expecting it. It's really amazing to see this quality of 3D on the X68000. The programmers really knew their stuff when it came to manipulating this machine. This is another great game for the system. Alright Joe, I'm highly impressed with the system so far. It's got a lot of really cool games on it.
It does, it really does, and we're not done talking about the games yet. I mean, as you can see by the position of the timeline below or whatever. But we're gonna kind of shorten our upcoming reviews just so we can squeeze a lot more games in because there are a lot of them to talk about.
Yeah, even though we have silky smooth buttery voices, you know, you're gonna want to see some more game action, I'm sure. So.
Yeah, so let's get into more games. Genocide is kind of a weird mech game by Zoom. You basically just wander around the stage and destroy things, and that's it, I think. I couldn't figure out how to get past the first area. The graphics are colorful, but they're not particularly well drawn. The controls are also very clunky. Genocide 2 takes place 10 years later and everything is much better this time around, but still not great. I can actually clear the first area, but that's it. I can't figure my way out of the second area. The controls are still really clunky, but I really like how the little humans are fighting you with all of their ferocity like they can beat you or something. Crossfire EX has nothing to do with Crossfire on the Genesis. Instead, it's a space shooter that kind of plays like Galactic Attack on the Saturn with the ability to attack things below you. The graphics aren't anything special, but the game is fun and the music is great. Is the game too hard for you? Well, there's no difficulty select here. Instead, switch it to 10 MHz and reboot. Suddenly the game becomes much easier due to the extra slowdown.
Return of Ishtar is a dungeon crawler by Namco. It's the sequel to the Tower of Druaga. The one thing I noticed about this game is that whomever owns this tower really likes to keep it clean. I've never seen such a clean tower. Yeah, and I'm in towers all the time. Anyways, the whole point of this game is to kill, find keys to unlock doors, and progress back up the tower. It's all done fairly well, but it can get a little repetitive at times doing the same thing over and over. Part of the problem is that the music is the same for every level. Still, a decent addition to the X68000 library.
There's a port of Afterburner 2 that's kind of okay. It won't work with the regular controller, so I actually had to play this with a mouse. Amazingly, it works pretty well and it felt natural. Unfortunately, I couldn't control the speed of the plane, which can make it kind of difficult to escape from
The enemy!
The graphics are pretty sparse and the music is what you'd expect.
Fire! 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 Fire!
Of course, every system needs a version of Space Harrier, and here it is. This one looks fairly similar to the TurboGrafx 16 version since the checkerboard floor has been replaced with a boring striped floor. Here's the Turbo version. These two versions are the only ones that I know of with the striped floor. Anyway, besides that, it's not a horrible version of the game, but there's really nothing special about it. Alien Syndrome is another Sega arcade port, and as far as I can tell, it's exactly like the arcade. But I never even got to the boss of stage 1 in the arcade, so take that with a grain of salt. I think I like this version better than the other versions I've played because I can actually make it to stage 2. Also, unlike the other versions, it makes me want to keep playing. Anyway, you basically just go around rescuing cocooned humans, shooting up aliens, most of which were inspired by the Alien movies. It's certainly not a horrible game by any means.
Go to the exit.
Even Cotton is on the X68000. About the only thing to really say about this game is that the keyboard lights blink and sync to the game music. Other than that, it's Cotton. Another cute little shooter with a witch is a game called Akuzuken Cha-Cha-Cha. At first glance, the game looks like Cotton with a little girl riding a broom and the experience bar at the bottom, but it has enough differences to make it, different? The graphics are great and are as colorful as it gets. I like the gameplay here. As you destroy enemies, you collect gems that fill your experience bar. Once this bar is full, your weapon gets an upgrade. Level 6 is as high as it goes, but it's not easy to get there. There's enemies and bullets all over the screen at times, and your character is pretty large, so dodging isn't always easy. One cool aspect I like is that when you aren't shooting, a 3-ball force field rotates around your character. This is super handy for destroying these lines of floating things. You also have a screen clearing magic that is really helpful in tight spots. And lastly, you have these air-to-ground missiles which makes it look like your character is giving birth to little kids that come out running. That's gotta hurt. This is a really fun game with some great music. I would love to see this one get a release somewhere, somehow here in the States.
Gemini Wing is a vertically scrolling shooter by Tecmo. In this one you can collect almost as many power-ups as you want and store them for later use behind your ship. But other than that, it's pretty standard stuff. I definitely recommend using the MIDI music by holding down the shift button as it boots. It sounds a lot better than the default FM music, which is pretty harsh. Daimakai Mora, otherwise known as Ghouls and Goats, is pretty much arcade perfect. But this version supports MIDI, so you can get that fake orchestra sound that you love on the Super Nintendo. Only it sounds a little bit less fake than that. Otherwise, everything's here. But truth be told, I still don't like how Arthur comes to a dead stop when diagonals are accidentally pressed. It may not matter much if you use a joystick, but I'm not really much of a joystick fan. Naos is another generic shoot-'em-up for the X68000, and believe me, there are a ton of these. Like most of the other shooters, this one doesn't really do anything to stand out. Thankfully, most of these games have really good music, and this one's no exception. It also has some trippy background effects from time to time. That's really all I have to say about this one.
Marble Madness looks to be an exact port of the arcade game. I played this game using the mouse, and while I was able to control the game okay, I lacked the precision necessary to beat it. And I always beat this damn game. It's impossible to beat this game using the mouse, as you keep on adjusting the mouse and end up just looking like a fool in the process. I guess there are other ways to play this game, like with a different mouse that lets you turn it upside down and use it as a trackball, but the mouse I used couldn't do that. How come, Joe? How come? Still, the game is Marble Madness, and I am a fan of this, so this is good.
Strider is also a nearly exact arcade port. And since this is the Japanese version, Strider makes a grunt every time he swings his sword. Every single time. There seems to be maybe a bit more flicker than the arcade version in the Stage 1 boss fight here. Overall, Strider is a fantastic game, but I think I prefer how the Genesis version handles over this one, at least for the most part. I love Granada on the Genesis, so I was stoked to play this version. It's very similar, but in a lot of ways it's almost like an arcade version in comparison. It has a cool opening sequence as well as graphic stills between each level. The stage layouts seem identical from what I can tell, and it's just as fun to play. You take your little tank around and blow up the required targets in each level. I like the music here better though. It's the same music as the Genesis, it just sounds a bit better. It supposedly supports MIDI, but I couldn't get it to work without crashing the game. Also, be sure to run this game in 10 MHz mode, otherwise you will get no music. And yes, it does have a lot of slowdown. It's still a really fun game though. Star Trader is a horizontal shooter. In this game, you pilot a spaceship and you shoot things. The gameplay is well enough and the graphics are adequate, but I've got to admit that the reason I like this game has mostly to do with the music. Overall, it's pretty easy, but at least you've got some great tunes to listen to as you breeze through the game.
Street Fighter II Champion Edition is on the system. What can I say? It's pretty much exactly like the arcade, and it uses the Capcom adapter that Joe mentioned in the beginning of this show, so you can use a 6-button Genesis controller. The reason these Capcom games are so close to the arcade versions is because they actually developed a lot of their CPS games using the X68000. That's pretty damn cool if you ask me. But you didn't, so whatever. Super Street Fighter II, The New Challengers, is also here, and it's as close to an arcade port as you're gonna get on a home system. The game plays very well, and it looks just as good as the arcade. It's nice to have the ability to choose your audio from the X68000 or the MIDI module. Both sound fine, and this is a welcome game for the system.
Thunderblade is on the X68000 and it's definitely the closest version to the arcade by far. It's got lots of cool scaling and you can go up and down in the overhead levels and all that cool stuff. Keep in mind that the X68000 doesn't have any hardware scaling and rotation built in. Granted, there's not as much on screen as the arcade version, but it's still really cool. Unfortunately, it doesn't even play as well as Super Thunderblade on the Genesis or the PC Engine version of this game. I've never even been able to make it past stage 1 and the gameplay is so poor that I don't care to keep trying. Supposedly this game supports MIDI, but I couldn't figure out how to engage it. Think that Soul Feast is exclusive to the Genesis and the Sega CD? Well, you're wrong! This version is pretty much identical with a few graphical enhancements here and there, like the background on stage 1. I don't think that the default FM music is as good as the Sega CD or even the Genesis version. It just sounds kind of gritty and thin. But the game is compatible with MIDI modules. This makes the music sound much, much better, though occasionally you'll hear an instrument or sound that just sounds a bit off. But no matter how you listen to it, the explosions sound very satisfying. They make you want to shoot down even more enemies. This is a pretty good horizontal shooter by Wolf Team.
Final Fight proves that the X68000 is more powerful than even my beloved Super Nintendo. I can't believe I just said that. Check this out. 2 players at once. Isn't that crazy? Oh, and there's even Guy and Cody in the same game. My Super Nintendo must be jealous watching me play this. I better go put a cover over it. One thing that's probably not too jealous is my Sega CD. Even with the MIDI turned on, the music here isn't as good as that one. The color is certainly better overall, but I think I prefer the Sega CD game. Still great fun though.
Arcus Odyssey by Wolf Team is pretty much exactly like the Genesis version. In this game you roam around maze-like areas with an isometric view. If I recall, you're looking for certain items that you need to obtain before you can leave the level. It's been a while since I've played this, but it looks and sounds pretty much like I remember the Genesis version, with perhaps a better sounding grunt when you get hurt. This game supports MIDI sound, but honestly I found the default FM sound was a lot better. Overtake is one of the few racing games on the X68000. This one seems to be heavily inspired by Super Monaco GP on the Genesis. I mean, it plays almost identically. You have a qualifying lap and then you race against your opponents. What's cool is that you can make it so that the real races have music. This helps the game to be a bit less boring than Super Monaco GP. Overall, it's not fantastic, but it's not too bad. Undead Line is another game that's also on the Genesis, or Mega Drive rather. This is a vertically scrolling shooter / run and gun. You can choose from 3 different characters in this single player game. I like that you have a choice of characters here in this version. As you're shooting down your enemies, you can blast open treasure chests to get items and different weapons, most of which completely suck. A lot of people say that the Mega Drive version is the better playing game, and I won't argue with them. But honestly, as cool as this game is, I am a bit turned off by having to start so far back when I die that I really don't play any version for long. The graphics and music are both great though. And there you go, that's the X68000 for you. It's a whole bunch of games, not even close to all of them, but still a lot of them.
Of course not. Like a good system, it should have a huge library. And the only downfall to this library, I thought, was that there is just an overabundance of shooters on there, which to a lot of people, that's not a bad thing. But, you know, when it's about 80% shooter, 20% everything else, yeah, that's a little too much. But
yeah, I don't think you're far off on that. If you like shoot 'em ups, you're gonna love the X68000. So, should you buy one? I mean, that's up to you. But you know, that's what we hope this episode did, to help you perhaps decide if you want one or not. I mean, they're not cheap.
No, they're not. And if you own one, let us know, because I'd like to see how many people actually own one out there.
Yeah, what do you think of the X68000? Let us know. And in the meantime, thank you for watching GameSack.
What's up?
Oh, hey Dave. I've got the Sega Dreamcast. It's a video game system which takes up a relatively small amount of space.
This is what I came all the way from my house to see? I mean, how could anybody take this thing seriously? It's so small and I just gotta go home. I don't... You suck. Why'd you call me back, Joe? Huh? Show me another stupid small system that's probably just gonna get lost?
Well, I've got a new system now, Dave. Witness the X68000.
Now this is more like it. The X68000 leaves almost no table space available, therefore you know this system is serious about the games it plays. There are so many wonderful accessories and components to make the X68000 an even better experience that I almost can't believe it. This is absolutely amazing, and there are tons of great games that anyone would feel privileged to play. The power consumption alone is probably more than any other appliance in the home. What a great system. Joe, you're a great friend. I want you to have your snatcher back.